Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Brothers of the Arcana, and as always, I am Alex Aldea.
I am Dave Ferrigno. Welcome back.
And with us today is...
my name is Brandon Kornbluh.
Excellent.
Would you like me to share some information about myself?
I would.
You have a promo first.
In due time. Promos.
Ad spot. That was quick.
It was good. Yeah, it was good. So our... Dave, what's our cigar today?
Our cigars of the day. We have the Drew Estate Nica Rustica.
Ooh.
You have the standard there. I have the Adobe.
Because Dave's special.
Exactly.
And one for Brandon. Also, he has one. And we are drinking the Singleton 15. Little Scotchy action.
Just throw that anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. That's very nice. Thank you. We have a brief spot there. And with that, we want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for coming down.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
I'm
Cheers.
honored that you invited me.
Absolutely. We ply our guests with alcohol to increase their likelihood of being more forthcoming.
Hopefully, anyway.
Hopefully. So, without further ado, Brandon is a member of our fraternity. He's a Freemason. And it's a wonderful thing. We get a chance to meet with incredible folks in our fraternity. Brandon's an obvious example of that. We've gotten to know him better over the past year. And tell us a little bit about yourself and
Sure.
your path.
Well, I guess I'll start with my career. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist. I'm a social worker. I've worked in intensive treatment. I've worked in schools for about 8-9 years. I'm a trauma therapist. I'm also a mindfulness and wellness counselor, certified in both, and play therapy. And anything I was able to, dip my feet into, I tried to, with the goal of expanding the breadth of my impact. But ultimately, I think what says more about who I am is that I'm in this field because from an early age, I felt an innate sort of instinctual calling to help people in whatever way I could. I recognize that our populace, our species, specifically over here, is plighted with various things.
Plighted, you say?
Yeah, for sure. And so I was compelled to help in the way that I thought I could help most. And that was as being a psychotherapist, mostly focusing on working with kids. Because, adults are lost. There's no undoing it. Don't waste your money.
That is very fatalistic and somewhat disturbing. But hey,
no coincidence.
That's why they invented booze. Okay, so that's an awesome thing. I wonder if you could tell us part of your background. I know was growing up in a tough neighborhood, having some issues as a kid, and then moving forward. I'm sure that must have played some part in your desire to, number one, work with kids, and number two, explore for yourself the potential of psychotherapy, what that can offer. And could you talk a little bit about maybe that little arc?
I'd be glad to.
Sure.
This gives me the opportunity to share with my friends here even more about this story, because I actually grew up in a beautiful neighborhood. I grew up in White Meadow Lake in Rockaway, New Jersey. It was beautiful. My family didn't have a lot of money. My parents separated before I was a year old, and so I was with my grandfather. So what I've experienced growing up was mostly a result of family traumas and separations, and then having to live with different people and be split amongst family members. That's super common for kids, especially nowadays. I mean, more and more so each year. Typical families are not as common as they were, decades ago, and especially in the 50s, I think was the height of the American nuclear family. So it's not that I have, a story there that is, upsetting or disheartening. It's pretty typical. The part of the story that I did live in tough areas, but that was all by choice. That was through my work. I lived in the Bronx for a few years, working as a direct support professional, helping adults with developmental disability and cognitive impairment with co-occurring addiction issues. And I went to school at Seton Hall and lived in Irvington for a little while. So lived in upstate New York, and I worked on south side of Syracuse with kids, who we would call underprivileged. I mean, they weren't, though. They were just typical kids. They didn't have as much access to resources. It was one of the reasons I was there. So my experience living in more urban areas that was all by choice. It was to help people who I thought at the time needed it most. Now I work in Chester, New Jersey. Actually, I share this in common with Bell Works here. I came today from Chester. Bell Works also was in Chester in 1928.
Wow, okay.
And moved
Didn't know
over
that.
here in 66. Yeah.
Are they really?
Yeah, it's the historian side of me. I had to research where I'd be joining you. But my journey to entering into this career and really my path had a lot more to do with a series of existential crises that I experienced growing up. So for one, I was born into a Jewish family, so I'm culturally Jewish. And right before I was going to be bar mitzvahed, my father converted to Catholicism. And so it's about a month before I learned this.
Don't you hate it when that happens?
Yeah, I don't know anybody else that's happened to. But it was good for me. It was really good for me because it forced me to ask questions that most people don't begin to tackle until much later in life. The question didn't get resolved, obviously, when I was 13. But I delved into what would then be a lifetime, and continues to be a search. That's not true. I shouldn't slight myself to say that I'm searching anymore. I don't really feel that I am searching. My journey took me to almost every major world religion. That's not true.
I'm sorry, I put the volume up. Yeah, it was crazy, wasn't it? Our first time live going, folks. Sorry about that.
Pretty
We're
cool. I'm honored.
doing our best. Please continue.
Thanks, Alex. So I after that I went to Israel and to Mount Masada, and I was bar mitzvahed at the Western Wall, and I think my grandparents were trying to solidify my appreciation for my culture and my heritage. But they also took me all over the world to Templar sites and quite a few other places that I didn't realize the significance of until later in life when I was studying, theology and art history and studying philosophy and anthropology. I'll fast forward the story. I wound up going to a Catholic school, to Seton Hall University. One of the requirements of my degree, which was social and behavioral science, with concentration in psychology, I studied theology there and anthropology and sociology. Of course, I became a social worker and got my graduate degree from Rutgers University. So I found Thomas Aquinas, right? So if anybody's familiar with Thomas Aquinas, you'll get my point here, and that was that after reading the Bible and the Torah and the Quran and the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita and Tao Te Ching and all of these religious and philosophical texts from all over the world, I had an epiphany, and that is that, well, we're all talking about the same thing. Everybody is talking about the same thing. This human experience is not, we surely have unique experiences, but the human experience, the quintessential human experience, is not unique to any one of us. We all have the same innate and instinctual drives. We all have the same primitive backgrounds, and we're all looking for enlightenment in some context or another. And the plight that I was referring to before, I think, permeates a lot of our daily experiences. And I hate to say that, given that we've had some tumultuous times throughout our history, human history, now is a time that is fraught with fear. There's not Vikings or Germanic tribes knocking down our doors, but I would posit to say that that people are more afraid than they've ever been. I think that's true terrorism, is terrifying our public.
So from that perspective, if you feel people are living in more fear than ever, how is that impacting society as a whole today?
Oh boy, Dave. Well, it forces us to make decisions with our amygdala, not our neocortex. And the beauty of, so I'll speak for a moment, from my lens, which is mental health and psychotherapy. And if you don't mind, you humor me sharing with you some of the work that I do with kids. I've done it with adults, but
absolutely,
it's nice and simple, and I think maybe resonate with your viewers. So I teach kids. I'm a humanistic therapist. So my goal is to help people understand the way their mind and body work. It's Eastern, right? Which has only been widely accepted in the last few decades. It's pretty hokey for a lot of people prior to that. But I think general populace has recognized that Eastern philosophies and healing and medicine worked for thousands of years in plenty of places. So why shouldn't we tap into that spiritualism and that holistic practice? I'll give a personal example. My wife and I were going through IVF a few years ago to have our daughter, and tried all kinds of things, and she wound up participating in acupuncture for blood flow, and not more than a week later did we find out that we were pregnant with my daughter. I have a few other explanations for it, but I would be inclined to believe that it helped, and why not? And just the fact that she felt secure and connected to her practitioners and connected to me and hopeful may have aligned her body in such a way that she was prepared for that. So, holism, we're not so simple as to say that there's one solution to any given problem or that we should only attack any issue from one direction, right? So the work that I do, both privately and in the school system is, of course, I'm only working with students in the capacity that they are my students, and I want them to function well in the academic environment. But, occasionally there's room for me to teach some psychoeducation. And psychoeducation, humanistic psychoeducation, removes blame and guilt, right? It doesn't make you feel wholly responsible for your poor choices or for conflicts that you have with other people. It helps you understand that you're human. This is how your brain works. These are some of the functions of your brain, some of the parts of your brain, and what you're tussling with in any moment, given any decision. The symbolism, the allegory of like a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other. There are parts of your brain that are actually in conflict with each other in any given moment. So I'll speak to this symbol that I use of a traffic light, an inverted traffic light, when I try to teach the kids about the different parts of their brain and about what might be motivating any given decision. So the amygdala, right, the reptilian brain, right, we'll call red. Makes sense? It's where fear comes from, right? The 4 Fs, fight, flight,
freeze,
and sex.
And sex?
Yeah, is the 4th F. We're gonna let's call it fawn. Right. We're gonna call it fawn because it really
fornicate.
Fornicate. No, it's fawning. What it really is it's it happens in domestic violence cases.
No fornication here.
When an individual is so afraid of perhaps their violent or abusive partner that they actually fawn in the hopes that the abuser will be more gentle to them. So one of the fear responses actually is fawn. That was a joke. The 4 Fs. That was a joke that my AP psychology teacher, Ms. Noel. Hi, Ms. Noel.
Hi, Ms. Noel. Is Ms. Noel listening?
Yeah, she probably will. I still talk to her. She's a wonderful woman. She really had as much influence on me in my upbringing as plenty of adults did.
Really?
I credit her. Yeah, she wrote me a beautiful college recommendation letter. Yeah, wonderful woman. And she taught me more about psychology, actually, in high school. And I think I learned, no offense to my professors at Seton Hall, but...
Who are also listening, I'm sure.
Probably aren't listening. No, I don't know. This would be blasphemous. So she taught us about the amygdala and different brain functions and the 4 Fs, right? So survival responses. So it's important to recognize that the reptilian brain, the amygdala, is in almost all organisms. The goal of the amygdala is survival, right? It's to get individual organisms to the place that they can reproduce. And then after that, it doesn't really have all that much function besides maybe some more evolved creatures to keep us alive after that. But once we've met our goal of reproduction, the amygdala's purpose is mostly satiated. After the amygdala is the limbic system, which we'll say is yellow. The limbic system is responsible for emotions, connectivity. An example of animals that really have a strong limbic
That's a
system.
cerebellum.
Cerebellum is as you're moving up into the neocortex, but
Wrong again, Dave.
that's okay.
What else is new?
But the limbic system, like dogs
Yeah.
are a good example of organisms that really depend on their limbic system to create connections to people and to connections to each other, pack mentality. And then the neocortex is like the green light. This is where logical decision making comes from. And then I think this is where we maybe delve into the esoteric. Humans are unique in that they have a frontal lobe, right? So what separates us from other organisms is this right here.
The third eye, or
the third eye, or the pineal gland, right? That's the frontal lobe. So, in my work to help my clients, my students, be less fearful, because again, there's not warriors at our gates. There's not, wolves fighting against us for food or sustenance. But for some of these kids in the hallways, it's almost like a pack of wolves is at their door, with regard to bullying and the pressures of social media, et cetera. And adults aren't free from that. There's inordinate amounts of pressure that comes from social media and people's connectivity to. There's benefits, significant benefits to globalization, right? Technologies are potential savior and bane of our existence, our demise, our inevitable demise. But the goal of the humanistic psychoeducation...
That's pretty dark, too. You sort of slide that right by, didn't you?
Alex,
all right, just slide that by right by.
Because I'm this rainbows and butterflies type guy.
Listen, you come off as very... Doesn't he come off, he's like super slick? He's like, he's got this voice, and it's like this thing that he says and does, and then you're just like, society will end, but you're going to be fine with it because I'm talking like this. No.
It's a call to action, Alex.
So you're friends with your elementary school teacher who's going to be listening.
My middle school psychology teacher.
Wasn't listening. I guess now
it's not your job. Your job is just to ask questions.
Ask questions, exactly.
They're the listeners.
They're absolutely. Somebody's got to listen. So what about relationships that you've burned bridges where they've all just gone up in flames? Have you had those, or do you just sail carefully through life?
The truth of it is, right, it's a journey. I've had growth. I wouldn't be the full on the hill now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm able to look back and look out and be an observer now, but plenty of bumps and bruises and hard knocks. And in my first few jobs, I was pretty fortunate. I was a tennis instructor for my grandfather while I was a teenager.
Did he have a club or something?
He was a pro. He was a USPTR certified pro. Now I am also. Actually, I teach in my township. Thanks, man.
Very nice.
But no, I've burned plenty of bridges. I think I've always meant well. I think most people mean well, but I've had to learn a lot of tough lessons for sure. Generally, my goal is to do as little harm as possible, while also being a warrior of the light and a proponent of social justice, which makes it pretty difficult when you feel compelled to speak truth while also trying hard not to upset people. There's a tough line to walk in that effort.
That is a tough line. I think we're going to try not to get political today. I know that in a lot of respects, all of us are on the same page in a lot of respects, especially on the brotherhood end of things.
Right.
Which is really all that matters at the end of the day. A person's politics are their own. But yeah, I agree with you. Social justice, when you mention that word, it sends me tingling a little bit because it's got a definite triggering effect in the modern society, right?
As of the past couple of years, but it
and maybe it shouldn't, right?
I think it shouldn't.
Right. It means
I
a
think
thing.
being woke or awakened shouldn't have a political connotation.
Well, even putting those two things together as meaning the same thing would be maybe something people would quibble about, right?
I
because
agree with you.
Woke and awakened, are they the same thing? I would say not.
Well, in a common parlance, they're not anymore, right?
Right.
As a colloquialism, they are no longer the same thing. So, yeah, you make a good point there. I wouldn't want to pair those two things together, certainly not. Because I would not consider myself a woke individual, but certainly an awakened individual or an enlightened individual.
Which ideally is kind of, I think, what we're all trying to be.
Right. I would hope that,
however path we try to get there,
I would hope
irrespective
that that's
of anything
all of
else.
our goal. Yeah, is to wake up and understand the nature of our existence, is to wake up and understand that the strongest force in the universe is love and acceptance and connectivity with each other, and hopefully we're moving in that direction. That's my hope. At least that's why I'm doing it from a grassroots angle, right?
So circling back on the fear and all the social pressures everybody's under today, what would you state, or from your professional opinion, what would be the best way to overcome that fear and get out of this psychological warfare that seems to be going on?
What did Timothy Leary said?
Tune in, turn off,
on,
drop out. Yeah.
I would say that we're part of a machine, right? I think most people know that. Certainly your viewers are well aware of this. We're part of a machine, a media and political machine, and there are algorithms that are manipulating us on a daily basis. consultants. I mean, there are Facebook executives that no longer work at Facebook that will, completely speak to the plights and perils of this new technology, new as of the last 15 years. But their consultants were all mental health professionals. They wanted to understand, how can we get people addicted? How can we get them to trigger their own dopamine release?
Wow.
So that they keep clicking. And it's all about ad revenue. So this is a big money machine.
Wow.
And our people are our products. And, it's a corporate endeavor, right? I think so. The idea is claim your own sovereignty, disconnect as much as you can, grow your own food, go hiking out in the woods. I just did today. Disconnect. And when I say disconnect, it's funny, again, colloquialisms, right? Mm-hmm. What I'm really trying to say is connect. Connect to universal energy. Connect to frequencies and vibrations with all other people and organisms and with nature. Disconnect, unplug. Let's call it unplug. Mm-hmm. Unplug, right? Stop watching the dribble and taking in, your favorite news media source, which is creating an army to fight for their cause, which is not in your best interest necessarily. But what happens as a result of all that is it creates fear, and it creates dissension, and it turns us against each other, when really we need to be united. Ultimately, the way that our species is going to continue to propagate and survive on this world is if we work together. I mean, we are already at a tier 1 species. We could sustain life on this planet indefinitely. Why are we not, right? Why are the nations of the world not coming together to work for greater good, to work for peace, to help, create a balanced ecosystem with homeostasis? Well, it's not what some people want. There'd be equality in that.
That's a funny thing you say. So we started talking about the work of Claire W. Graves outside, which Beck and Cowan turned into another book on a color grading scale called Spiral Dynamics. And so the idea is, what do you consider part of your tribe and what is not part of your tribe, right? So as a baby, you're a 1. You just think about yourself. That's your only thing, And suddenly, at one point, you become a 2 because you become aware of other, right? Mother is bringing you food and other things that you need to survive. So now you're a 2 on the scale. You've evolved a little bit, if you want to call it. Right. 3 would be most of the tribes of the world, the nomadic tribes, the tribes of the Old Testament, let's call them, right? Sure. Including the Mongols and the early Semitic peoples and obviously all the battles that happened there, the Hittites and all those people.
Which really is nationalism.
Well, yes, nationalism everything's created, right? So it depends on what level you're creating, but we'll get there.
Social constructs.
We'll get there, right?
Sure, we'll get there.
So number 3 would be there's a me, there's a you, and there's a we. Uh-huh. Right, so the tribe is the we, but everybody else is persona non grata. Mm-hmm. Number 4 is all organized religions. So there's a me, you, we, and a upstairs that you're now responsible for, which is part of the larger group.
Or downstairs.
Or downstairs. And
depending on we respect all beliefs and faiths.
And of course there were... well, I'll tell you right now, I don't respect all beliefs and say if you believe in downstairs, we got a problem. But anyway, the point being is that
I thought you played D&D, Alex.
Well, we'll get to that. But the idea is that you have that. Not only is there an upstairs, but there's an upstairs that gets funneled through a priesthood, right? An organized priesthood that now rules whatever it's going to rule.
Right, like a democratic republic.
Later. You. I see what you did there. Number 5 is robber baron capitalism.
Right.
Number 6 is, strictly speaking, socialism.
You jumped past robber baron capitalism really quickly.
I felt it was pretty self-explanatory. Because
it have to be robber baron.
Well, it's because it's the most cutthroat version of capitalism, right? So it's the early forming of capitalism. What that was, it was like we're going to give you a market within which it's every man for himself, right? And it doesn't. We're not going to put strictures on how far you can go or what you can do to your fellow man within this microcosm of society to get there.
The Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers gained too much power, and it was associated with names.
Well, to a great extent,
associated with corporations, which still have incredible amounts of power.
That's a thing. And number 6 is socialism, which is so as you see, each of the odd numbers is a singular thing. It's pointing at a singular idea.
Moving towards pluralism.
And the even numbers are committee based, let's call it, right? So socialism obviously being quite committee based, trying to look for the good of all,
Ideally.
ostensibly.
Though like a utopia,
Big failure in my thinking, but yeah.
Theoretically possible, but has never been pragmatically implemented.
Other than in small, like in communes or kibbutzes or things like that are manageable in that sense, right?
But degrees of socialism are, in plenty of countries. And in our country, the welfare system was, the New Deal was a socialist movement.
Sure. Without so was the Great Society under and so at number 7, which is as high as he gets, is basically almost like an enlightened self rule. Like, yes, you are understanding that you are a person and your needs are interesting, but it's not a Hans Morgenthau thing like, action driven in terms of self-interest. It's how can we do a win-win? How can we all
it's
succeed?
self-actualization.
But with myself not saying I'm part of the greater collective and not all that is, there is a singular here, right? But it's part of that, as you start to get into stuff. So, yeah.
Well, so from my lens, mental health, I think it's important to touch on Kohlberg's morality with this conversation, and that is such that from a young age, people are most focused on me, right? We're completely egoistic as babies and as toddlers. We see the world through our own eyes, and we can't even begin to contemplate or understand what it means to have empathy or to validate another's experience or even look past that they're not just all actors on our own stage. There are plenty of adults that we know who live that life and who have not progressed through those stages. The goal, ultimately, is having an abstract concept of morality. Not moral relativism, where morality and ethics change based on the scenario, but a child knows right from wrong. They know what hurts them. And one of the most fundamental and ancient rules of thumb is the Golden Rule. Right. In Akkadian, Sumerian, and Hebrew. It's everywhere in the world, ancient Hindi. Children understand that if it hurts me, I shouldn't do it to you. If we can move society more in the direction where we're not looking out for only ourselves, and to your point, understanding how we interact with each other and work together while still respecting our individuality, there's a concept. I did the lecture actually at your lodge, the Drumbeat Circle. Do you remember me? I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little later. Do you remember me talking about the concept of standing in, right? So it's the idea of, do you want to stand out from a group or do you want to fit into a group? And I shared with them during the lecture that the goal ultimately in society is for you to stand in, for you to stand proudly within a group, to have your own uniqueness and individuality, but to understand how that harmonizes with a group so that you can create music, right? So that you can resonate with those around you and be on the same frequency, right? All musical terms. So functionally, I hope, right, in my work, and I've begun to see other folks in my field and other folks in the field of mysticism and healing, try to help people move towards uniting, but also advocating for themselves, right? Also recognizing that they're important, their family's important, they have to care for themselves, but the moment they are taken care of and their family's taken care of, the next goal is to care for their brother, their neighbor, their community. And if all of us are practicing and living in this way, then ultimately we're all caring for each other. And our community doesn't end at the end of our street. Our community doesn't end at our town limit. It doesn't end at our state. It spills over into the next state. It spills over to the next nation, and it spills across oceans. We should functionally all be taking care of each other. At least that's my opinion.
So that's the raising of that anthropological level of what is the other, how much responsibility do I have to the other, and if I do have responsibility, how do I act actualize that while not giving up on my own thing.
It's fear again, Dave. You were asking before about fear. It comes down to fear again. This is all primitive. This is all instinctual. It's innate in us. It's about the myth that we're competing over resources. For a long time, I say we, Westerners, not Native Americans, but Westerners that came to the United States, came to North and South America, were competing over resources. Although we seemingly, with manifest destiny, had all of the resources at our disposal. But the whole goal, really, for those at the highest levels of power is to give the populace the impression that they have to compete for resources. And that if they don't punch the clock, work a 40-hour week, pay your taxes. And I'm not advocating for anybody to be deviant from society. I'm a sociologist. I want everybody to understand what's socially acceptable and appropriate and figure out how that fits in with everyone else. No one should be infringing on the rights of anyone else, theoretically. But
Realistically, I would posit.
I think realistically. I think pragmatically.
If it stays at theoretically, it's not of much use.
Well, I think it's a little bit more difficult when you talk about corporations being individual, being individuals, and then you talk about
that's a tough fiction to go through, and I think to some extent that Chevron deference that we just talked about earlier really goes to at least potentially reworking the way the government works, or has been working lately, which was not, I think, constitutionally the way that it should have been working, but, it is what it is.
Alex, I bet every era, folks look at their current time and think it's about to hit the fan, right?
Oh, yeah.
We're at
each era has its own problems, right? And
but I just can't believe that we're not approaching the asymptote. I just can't. I feel like more
who's
so
asymptote?
Than ever, that more so than ever, we're quickly approaching some inevitability where there's going to be a paradigm shift, and unfortunately, paradigm shifts are never gentle or subtle. And I think
why?
Well, because why are paradigm shifts not gentle or subtle? Well, because of fear. Because why do you think? That's funny that you asked me the question and you already had an idea.
I do actually want to think about it. I kind of figured you'd probably say fear because we were talking about fear. Because you can't see past the event horizon. I think that's probably right. So if you look at the dialectic thing, there's a thesis, there's an antithesis, and they fight. That's what you just were talking about.
But there's a status quo.
Right, within that paradigm.
Within the paradigm,
there's a thesis and antithesis, and they fight.
All right. So it's short-sightedness is what you're saying, ultimately.
Well,
you can't see past the event horizon.
I think we're conditioned to be
to the status quo.
In a sense, and the other people don't. And the people that don't fight with the people that do.
Well, who are the people that don't? The progressives.
The ones not clinging to their guns and Bibles, I guess.
The ones that...
Right.
yeah, right. Well, they're the ones who want to move forward, whatever that means. Now, there's plenty of fear that can be drummed up from wanting to move forward into some unknown ground.
The disaffected. The disenfranchised. The disgruntled.
Yeah.
Mostly ex-post office workers. No, I'm joking. But out of that fight, there gets created a new... synthesis, right. So something happens, and it jumps up to
tumultuous at first, and it tears apart the fabric of society for a while until the pendulum starts to swing back to the middle, and then those who are looking to conserve their power try to figure out from what mounts they need to reassert themselves. But yeah, once there's a paradigm shift, hopefully. It levels the playing field to some degree. Well, remember when Hogan talked about,
I'll just put that down anywhere. Yeah.
Sunbursts, sunspots, and also Eric Mattson talked about. There may be a time, there's reason for us to believe that there's going to be an EMP wave that takes out the grid and levels the playing field from a credit perspective, right? Where we're all back to basics. When it doesn't matter that I have a yacht, if I can't grow food on my yacht, I'm starving.
Right.
I might be able to sail across the ocean with the gas I've got in my reserve, but if I can't procure food, right?
But at that point, you probably wouldn't have any electronics to sail across the ocean, so you better be on a sailboat.
You wouldn't be able to navigate it. That's a good point.
Exactly.
You still have your fossil fuel burning in your engine. You'd be able to make it across, right?
Well, right, but if you needed some kind of spark from... to start the engine, as an example.
It's a good point.
Electricity.
Yeah, good point. There's other ways to make electricity, right?
Well, absolutely. But
who would be fine, Dave?
know how to do that.
You guys know that should that happen theoretically as brothers, come over to my house. I'm going to be growing food in my backyard, right?
I'm telling Monsanto. That's it. No, my point was, let's say this is, and I'll try to do this so that we could see it. You could see it on. So this is
our sponsor,
the Stone Age. Yes, this is the Stone Age, right?
Right.
And we're all traveling along the Stone Age, getting better and better at making better hatchets made out of stone, spears made out of stone, all kinds of things like that, right? And then at some point, like Mark said, quantitative accumulations lead to qualitative leaps. So you build, then it jumps up to another plane here, which is now the Bronze Age.
Yeah, a series of plateaus.
So it's not like we continue to just get better and better Stone Age equipment. At one point, all of this becomes irrelevant because it was a move to really, this is what we're working for, right? That's where the evolution, in essence, happens. And then you go back to the quantitative amassing. So socialism versus capitalism is still something on our trajectory that then leads to whatever is going to be the next thing, which isn't either of those, right, more so. Yeah. But in that moment, right there, that's where the event horizon is, and nobody can see what the next thing is because it's a whole other paradigm than anyone's arguing about.
Yeah, and it's such as the case with biological evolution as well. There's always these huge leaps. Change is not gradual, right? Change is cyclical. It comes in waves. Well, everything is waves, right? Everything is energy. Everything is flux. So yeah, point well taken.
Well, we're just getting at some very interesting things here, which I want to talk about more.
And I also think if we're obviously going back to the Stone Ages because our power grid's wiped out, you better go make some friends with the off-gridders and people that actually know how to survive and sustain themselves.
Unfortunately, in this world, in this country, you're going to need to make friends with people with a lot of armaments. Because when there's no resources... In
every country. If you don't have government, you better have armaments.
Right, but there's places where, folks will resort to agriculture again, and there's places where people will recognize that there's people who are resorting to agriculture and we can take their food. And I don't know what we're conditioning ourselves to be. Are we the ones who are going to produce, or is it going to be Mad Max here?
Well, if we saw what happened during Hurricane Sandy, it seems like Mad Max.
Yeah, it's worrisome.
Well, it might be
for a couple days, right?
It might be. So we could talk about briefly. Maybe this is a good. Do you mind if I get into?
Which segue do you choose?
Right. There's so many segues, but there's one right in front of us, and that is that both Brandon and I will out us as role playing fans.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right now, you forget it, Brandon.
Nerd.
It's too late. It's too late. We have to tell everyone.
Being tied up in dungeons?
No. Well, sort of.
Not me.
But
I'm happily married.
Yes. No, we're talking about things like Dungeons and Dragons, Fallout, Warhammer 40K, all of these
any
other
media, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Again, we're all talking about the same thing. This innate desire for some kind of fantasy where you have power to change your trajectory, where you can influence your environment and be a hero amongst your community.
Right. So with that, you've seen Fallout. The series, basically it gets at what we're kind of talking about now. So say there's an apocalypse, what happens? You have the vaults where everything's hunky-dory, and they're sort of living this fantasy 50s existence where they're all going to get out there and can-do attitude and all that other stuff. Then you got the other guys eating...
Super sardonic. It's so
right,
cool
eating each other up in the above. And then... other types of societies, like the Brotherhood, that's really more of a religious bent to it.
Maybe self-righteous to some degree.
They're all self-righteous. Oh, don't kid yourself, man.
Outside of Fallout, right?
Don't kid yourself. They're all self-righteous.
Right.
One's maybe more than others, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, they're really out there saying, this is the book.
This is how we do it.
This is the way.
Right. This is the ritual. This is the dogma. This is how you do it. This is the way.
Yeah, exactly. So, you play. We haven't had the pleasure of playing D&D together as of yet, but I'd like to. Do you ever use any of the modalities of D&D or role playing in your therapy, or do you?
So that's actually a cool question. I thought you were going to ask the opposite. I thought you were going to ask me, do I ever use my my expertise and my training in D&D? And don't tell my players, but yes,
and
I
you're
do.
secretly therapizing them?
Well, I've joked about it with them, but if you were to ask my players, they would say that they've grown pretty considerably. I mean, one is like very gainfully employed in the career that he wants to be in since being part of the campaign. One got married and has also gotten a job that is exactly in his line of work, what he went to school for. Family members that hadn't seen each other or were never interacting with each other who are now together regularly. One of them became a Mason, was raised in my lodge. So, I think there's a lot of growth coming out of my campaign. But originally, that wasn't the idea. It wasn't my goal. I wanted to play D&D. I had never played before. I only started playing D&D a couple of years ago. That it was COVID. My wife, my brothers had said my whole life they'd be like, "You'd be great at that. You're so creative. You can do accents and funny stuff, right? Games, game theory, good at math, etc." And I was skateboarding and playing music and hanging out with girls, and I was captain of the tennis team and student government. I was doing stuff, right? I didn't have time for it.
Oh, they're doing things.
I was friends with plenty of people I was friends with everybody. I was friends with people who played D&D. I just didn't have time for it. Friends with people who played Magic. But then COVID, I had plenty of time. My daughter was a year old. My son was born. I'd put my daughter to bed, bathe her, put her pajamas on, night routine. My wife would take my son and do the night routine with him. And then I've had an hour or so, where I would do some research or do any work. And my wife and my brothers got me the D&D books. And I just dove into that and realized that the crazy thing about D&D is it's touching on, the myth, right, the mythology is touching on so many of the world's philosophies, religions, mythologies, anthologies. It's all in there. It's because it's an amalgamation of creators, right? So you're going to get the greatest pieces of work from an amalgamation of creators, like the Bible, for example, right? So your question was, I'm reflecting on the beauty of this game, and there's a lot of literature now in my field about how this game really helps people problem solve, resolve conflict, interact with each other in person, play out scenarios that they might be too ashamed of or feel guilty or feel too responsible to play out in any other format, even in role-playing in a psychotherapy session. But there's a buffer when you have an avatar where you're kind of free to play things out and experiment with you remember being a middle schooler, right? This week I'm a punk. Next week I'm a prep, right? Let me see which works. Who do they like? Which version of me do they like? Which is cooler, right?
And it's funny that they're playing that out to try to establish themselves within a tribe.
You're right.
It's who the other likes, not what fits me the best.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's an interesting point
and
of consideration.
Self-exploration and experimentation has to come from within. Mm-hmm. When we're constantly looking at what's from without to measure and quantify or qualify our own value, we've entered into, in some cases, an irrevocable stage. You can no longer look at yourself as having inalienable rights, as being fundamentally virtuous. If you're only as good, it's where disorders like borderline personality disorder come from, where you measure yourself based on how others view you, and that's a disorder that destroys families. I'll actually volunteer to say that I believe that's what separated my parents is borderline personality disorder.
So not to derail the conversation on D&D here, but
like Alex did.
Yeah.
No, it's totally relevant.
How would you say that pertains to relationships then? Because especially if you're trying to find acceptance, if you want your partner, as an example, to accept you for who you are.
Okay.
In some cases, I think, especially from a men's perspective or a man's perspective, I think a lot of times women want to change us. We're always an experiment.
Well, my
project to them. Right?
My wife is one of my D&D players.
Oh. Very cool.
Yeah, so she wasn't originally. I played with these guys for a while. So the issues that plague men, right? I almost wrote a book a couple of years ago during COVID. I started to. I was going to call it the fall of man, right? It really means the fall of our role and the pressure for us to sort of maintain our composure and not express our emotions if they're anything short of strength, is what society deems being strong, and how there's emotions that are easier. There's primary emotions, which are shame, guilt, jealousy, and then secondary emotions like anger, which is easier to exhibit than sadness. And boys often feel like if they are sad, they need to act out to maintain an air of strength. And that's usually imparted on them by their parents or their fathers in some cases.
Why this hierarchy between shame and guilt are first tier and anger is second tier?
It's about what part of the brain it comes from, right? So if we remember that the amygdala is the fear center, right? And if you're trying to survive, you're not just trying to survive physically, you're also trying to survive socially because we're social creatures. So being ostracized or being a pariah in society instinctually was a death sentence. So those are sort of the resulting feelings. So the anger is a mask. The anger is a way to assert dominance so that we can maintain our role in society. I'm not going to be weak. I'm going to maintain strength so that you can't take advantage of me, so that you don't see me as a mark where you can steal my resources, steal my mate. So that's one of the explanations for why it's a secondary emotion. I'm realizing as we're having this conversation, I'm jumping over so many points. You guys ask great questions, and I wanted to talk more about, if you'll allow me.
We won't.
No.
Well, too bad. I don't really need your permission, right? I'm the guest here.
That's true.
If there's anything you
He's
want
going rogue.
I'm going rogue.
Rogue
Been known
One.
to do it. Rogue One.
If you want to circle back on anything,
If you don't
by all
mind,
means.
yeah.
Sure.
I don't think we'll lose track. Talking to you guys is great. I relish in any opportunity to talk to you guys. I love your podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm honored to be on it, and we have great conversations. And this is a really good opportunity to talk about a lot of these things, but also to share them with people, because the goal really is for us all to become enlightened, for us all to evolve, and not just individually, right, as a species. But okay, so I'll circle back to fear, right? Fear. Because humans have access to our neocortex and we can think about things logically, it doesn't mean that the amygdala, right, and the brainstem, the reptilian brain are not still functioning. So plenty of people, in fact, I would posit that
He would surmise.
we all share in common now a global trauma, and that is, I'm not going to say COVID, but the isolation that resulted from COVID and the way COVID was handled. A lot of us share in common the trauma of 9/11 back in 2001. I was in high school. That shook me. So when you've shared global trauma in common, and as a trauma therapist, a licensed trauma therapist, I can tell you that trauma turns on the red light, right? So when I use a traffic light for students, younger students, to understand. The red is the amygdala, an upside-down traffic light. The yellow is the limbic system. The green is the neocortex. Neo being new, it's the most evolved, most new part of our cognition, part of our brain, and it allows us to think about things logically and problem solve. That's really the part of your brain that you want to be using when you're trying to solve a conflict between other people. But I imagine it's the case for you, for your viewers, certainly for me, that most people, when they enter into conflict with their partner, with a friend, with a family member, with an estranged family member, they're operating out of not emotions, right? I mean, it's emotions, right? It's their feelings. But ultimately, it's their fear. It's their fear of being taken advantage of again. It's their fear of being wronged, their fear of being hurt, the fear of looking weak. It all comes down to fear. And we move in such a way that we condition ourselves and each other to operate based on fear, not logic, right? Not to work together. I've given talks on road rage. People drive to, let's say, work or anywhere. They go out to lunch. They drive to lunch. They drive back. Road rage is prevalent. Most people experience road rage. If you guys drive behind me, you'll be enraged. But if
Are you
driving,
like super slow?
I drive the speed limit, and I listen to tunes. On the way here, ironically, I heard Soul Shine by the Allman Brothers, listen to Heart of Gold by Neil Diamond. It's like nothing's coincidental. I was supposed to hear those songs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's true.
if your life is bookended by these moments that are full of rage, right? Then your interactions in between
I have a lot of friends
those
like this.
moments are going to be full of rage. There's no way for you to turn the red light off and see with green. If you just arrived, flipping somebody off and getting flipped off at, is that how you say that? There's no way for you to... I have a rough day at work, and I blast, Foo Fighters and yell home, and I get home and hug my kids and wife and dog, and I'm good, right? But I expect somebody else to be able to curse someone out on the highway and then get to work and now teach a class of second graders. You know, so to look at your life and refine it in such a way that you're more peaceful regularly is good for all of us. So the work that I'm doing, right? I'm not a psychotherapist because I just love people so much and I just want to help them. It's because I recognize that we're messed up. You know, there was a lot of problems, and we are not nice enough to each other, and we don't say good morning enough, and we don't smile. We're not authentic and genuine in our interactions, and we need to be. Please, for my children's sake, I think we need to work on this. And the more that we're plugged in, and I look at schools that I work in, and kids are just they're playing Fortnite and Roblox and these games, and they're being socialized. Actually, a brief tangent. I did a training I mentioned to you yesterday when I spoke to you 2 days ago for the Department of Education during COVID. It was modeling SEL, social emotional learning, and called it Takes One to Teach One. Talked about great teachers. I referenced Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World, who's like an epitome teacher that really genuinely loves and cares about his students. The goal there was forget teaching SEL to the students, teach SEL to the teachers. If they walk the walk and not just talk the talk, it'll have a lot more impact on the students. So I want people to understand this for my children's sake and for their children's sake, because the world is only as good as we are to it, right? We're borrowing this world from our children. We're in this world right now, borrowing it. It's on lease right now from our children. The generations ahead of us are going to inherit this world that is only temporarily ours, and we have to make the most of it. We have to make it better for them. Now, I made the mistake when I did that presentation for the Department of Education. I made the mistake of saying that during COVID, your children are lacking socialization. They're not being socialized.
Why is that a mistake?
Because the truth of it was they were being socialized. They were being socialized by guys my age who are playing video games in their parents' basement. I made a mistake. You can't not be socialized unless you're in a deprivation chamber. You're always socialized in some capacity. Even a boy that's raised by wolves is socialized by the pack. So our children were socialized during COVID, and we're currently seeing the results of that because most of them, parents were pulling their hair out, not knowing how to educate their children or even tolerate them to some degree. And so the kids were on screens, and we see the ripple effect of that now. But kids were being socialized by, again, guys my age that didn't have anything to do. They were playing Call of Duty before all these elementary school kids logged on, and they're still playing Call of Duty to this day. And the stuff that they were saying,
oh god,
the raging, the trolls. It's just so toxic. I still hear kids speak that way. They're these keyboard warriors. I've got some in my family who are totally comfortable just roasting somebody with their fingertips with a screen in between them. God forbid they ever say that to my face, right? But that's where genuine and authentic interaction was lacking. And we've got an entire generation of people who are impacted by that, who are now having to be re-socialized and taught how to interact with each other appropriately and respectfully. And I tell you, it's a lot of work. You know what we call it in my field, though? Job security.
You're not being replaced by AI?
I don't know that I know, right? Inherently cannot be replaced by AI unless it can feign humanism well enough, which maybe inevitably it will be there at some point. But I don't think so. And the reason why I don't think so, because there is a fundamental energy. We three of us spoke on the phone a few days ago, right? It didn't feel like this, right?
Not at all.
I couldn't be me then on the phone with you guys.
Right.
Because I use myself in my work. I am the energy that I carry with me. I am the field of energy that I put out outside of my body. You don't feel that over the phone with me. It's why telehealth in some regards is inferior to in-person work.
Without doubt.
You got to connect.
Although you bring up an interesting point, because I've worked with other energetic workers, and oftentimes working through Zoom, like if you're doing Tai Chi and you're doing Tai Chi healing, let's say, oftentimes Zoom can actually be a help to that, because all of the other intangibles, smells, other things that are not present. So you can focus much more on the energetics, which is very interesting that way. So sometimes that could actually be a plus.
It works for meditation as well, right? I would be a distraction to my participants if I'm guiding a meditation of theirs.
Okay, so now you're getting into something that I really wanted to talk about, which I found
Finally
weird. And no, I want to talk about all this stuff, but I suffer from something called misophonia. It's a recently diagnosed thing.
Okay. Is that right?
It's where like certain types of sounds, like that whole ASMR thing,
It's physiological.
where it's like fight or flight, right? And so it's certain sounds produce that fight or flight response.
Wow.
Like nails on a chalkboard, other things like that.
Sure.
One of those things, and I went through therapy for other things in the past, whenever the therapist would try to induce the hypnotic state, that hypno voice was one of those things like, you're getting sleep. It's like, it just creeps me out. Like even hearing it, it's something almost like a visceral thing that happens.
Yeah.
That's why I was wondering, and I found some great progress done with, for instance, conversational hypnosis, where that comes very this is what's happening kind of thing. That's what begged my question with, do you ever use any of the stuff that you learned through role play to do in your therapy? Because that setting up a scene, right, where you're doing it where, you're bringing somebody into that work in certain respects, into the story, into whatever, and that's a ritual or that's a space where now that's altered and you're able to work with them like a workshop, right?
Beautiful, yeah. So short answer, yes. Yes, so much so. And I'll touch on the drum circle that I led for your guys last year, because yes, I have used D&D. There's a group of boys that I teach. I facilitate social skills groups, right? So Bowden's group process is such that when groups first come together, and that's in any capacity, corporate, all the way down to students in a classroom. When they first come together, they're storming. They're trying to figure out what's the dynamic here. They need somebody to sort of take control and make them feel safe. Ultimately, turn off the red light. Right? They need to feel safe. So once the storming is over, based on Bowden's theory, we begin to normalize expectations. Right? Eventually, we perform. Okay. So eventually, the group. I'm able to step back as the facilitator, and the group sort of functions on its own, right? They take leadership positions and they maintain, the group's never mine. I never take ownership for it. I don't have any kind of authority over these kids. I'm just there to keep them safe and make sure the group is theirs. So they create the rules for the group and the expectations for each other. If one day a kid says, I think we should be able to chew gum in here, I say, well, how can you make that happen? Well, can I ask the group to vote? It's your group. You decide. Hey, guys, how do you feel about voting on chewing gum? Raise your hands. They just voted on whether or not they would vote on chewing gum.
Right.
So they have to own it. Well, there was a group of boys that was dysregulated, just coincidentally, all classified for emotional dysregulation for the most part, autism. Some of the more typical social skills routes or content that I would have taught to a different group worked all right with me facilitating it. I got some of that curriculum out and got them to learn some things. Never did they make more progress than in 3 sessions of D&D that I had them play. I simplified it a ton. I made the character sheet, simple math. They also got math practice, but they actually wound up, I'm working at school. They wound up negotiating with each other, understanding the error of their decisions, their role play. I don't mean game role play, but their social role play, wound up helping them generalize those lessons to their interactions outside of group, which is not something that I had as much success with prior to that. And there's a lot of literature in my field as of late. Obviously, there's not a lot of therapists that also coincidentally are dungeon masters. But I'm sure there will be more literature. Hey, maybe I should write, on this topic, but I don't have the time to experiment. That D&D is a great medium to provide counseling. I will probably in my career facilitate groups for people or for kids or adults that have difficulty otherwise engaging, with the content, with social content. without sort of this buffer in between. Same way that drum group worked, right? So what I was really teaching in there was call and response, was understanding harmony.
We should probably at least preface what we're talking about.
Yes, you're right.
So Brandon gave a presentation at my lodge last year where he basically put everybody in a drum circle, gave me as the worshipful master of the lodge at the time, or kind of like the president. I was just there leading the drum circle, and everybody else had the opportunity to join in with their own drums, but they could either do their own beat or go with the beat of the drum. So,
yeah. So actually, what you were was the heartbeat, right? So less that you were the leader, right? Because you weren't dictating anything for them.
Right.
You were establishing a consistent heartbeat with which they could come in and stand in, as I was saying before. So there was no direction from you. They just had to sort of coalesce, right? Find harmony, right? Resonate at the same frequency. And they did. I mean, you had guys who were like afraid to get in the circle, who didn't have any musical experience, and said to me and you, I don't know if I can do this, right?
Right, more than one.
More than one.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And actually, when we first started, nobody wanted to participate.
Nobody wanted to.
And then
I wanted to.
But
You
then,
did want to.
Yes, you
Yeah,
did.
you did.
But once we got to the second iteration
Yeah.
of the circle, everybody wanted
Everybody
in.
Right.
wanted in.
They're like, this is so much fun.
You know, it actually had some pretty interesting implications on your lodge that same night and thereafter, and I hope it was beneficial to you guys.
Absolutely.
I think it probably was,
Yeah.
right?
And that harmonization and, everybody tuning into that frequency was truly, special in a sense. It's like
I'm
everybody
glad,
just being on
yeah.
the same page.
Yeah, right. And it's not agreeing, right? It's not operating or walking in the same, in the same steps. It's just walking with the same rhythm, right? It's just operating with the same patterns, right? And respecting ultimately the heartbeat of the group, right? So therapy modalities such as those drum circles, and I should give credit to, that's actually Drum Beat out of Holyoke Institute. I tweaked it a little bit, but that's where I was trained. Holyoke Institute in Australia, I was trained in Philly. And then D&D therapy, which has not been coined by a psychotherapist yet, but I know it will be, because for a long time Sandtray therapy was a modality. It still is. That works really well. Play therapy. People started using Minecraft in Sandtray therapy, where they're essentially creating their world and then processing it and reflecting on it via a video game. And in this era, it's inevitable that we're going to start using, games that kids are playing to teach them how to interact appropriately.
Wow.
Yeah.
So music got everybody to tune in, not only including people that were doing it for the first time, and they were totally offbeat at the very beginning, and then over time they started acclimating and then moving down this sort of funnel thing to everybody acclimating.
And it sounded great at the end.
And it did. It was a cohesive,
It really was.
together sound.
And maybe if everybody's lucky, I'll add a clip in here.
Yes.
So they can watch
Cool.
it.
Yes.
Oh, you recorded it that day?
We have a couple little clips in
really?
recording.
He records everything in his life, absolutely. Or take
I
pictures.
timestamp everything.
So he,
Receipts.
right. So let's not get into that.
lot more things came out in that, which I have the eye and ear for. But I want to give anybody here the opportunity to identify something that they noticed, and feel free to connect it to